Alrighty, well, welcome everyone. My name is Maddie. I joined the team here at Fossil Creek early this spring, and this is the first class I'm teaching here, so please, if you enjoy it, give your feedback up at the front so we can do more fun ones like this. Today we're going to be doing Intro to Houseplants. The first half of it will kind of be just me going through some basic needs of the different plants and stuff, and then we'll do a Q&A afterwards for anything that y'all are wondering about. So the main things to consider with houseplants are how much light do you have available for them and how often do you really want to water them. So light is going to be the only truly limiting factor. There's medium light, low light, bright light. It all depends on which direction your windows are facing and how many shade trees you have in your yard. I have west-facing windows at home, and they are not even as bright as my east-facing ones because I have 2 giant oak trees out front, so they are useless. But generally speaking, south-facing windows, west-facing windows, full exposure, that's going to be considered bright light to medium light. East-facing windows are going to be considered medium to low light. South-facing windows are going to be considered low light. There are definitely, north-facing windows. There are definitely instances where you get really good exposure from the north, depending on where your house is and, again, how many trees you have in your yard. But usually, just because it doesn't ever get any direct sun, south is considered low light. So if you're lucky enough to have some really lovely south or western exposure windows, you have that bright light, the options are endless for what houseplants you can do. Anything that is labeled as low light tolerant, medium light tolerant, would love to be in bright light. It just can handle the lower light. It really has to do more with how close it is to the window when it comes to something actually burning inside your house. Certainly, if anything is in a very bright window, the leaf is touching the window, it will get a burn on it. But, if you back it up from that, it should be all right. So anything and everything can be done in that kind of exposure. When it comes to medium light, shadier western exposure or eastern exposure, your options are more limited but still very extensive. Anything on this table right here can handle both bright or medium light, and quite a few of these can handle low light to barely any natural light. These are kind of our easiest introduction houseplants. I've kind of grabbed a variety of different stuff in different plant families for y'all to see. It's one of those kind of deals where everything has a variety of different textures and colors you can get it in and have it still in that family. When it comes to houseplants, generally they are tropical plants from either South America or Africa, and they have been cultivated and propagated over the years to be very tolerant of living inside of our houses. So these are going to be the much easier options for that. If you do have low light, then your options are going to be limited to just a few of these. Anything in this Dracaena family, or Dracaena you'll sometimes call it, herd. Dracaena is easier for me. And I always say, however it helps you remember how to spell it is how it's pronounced. So any of these guys, they come in a variety of different colors, of course, and they come with much thicker leaves on them. If you don't like the spiky look, they are soft. They're not pokey like a cactus, but they can handle very low light situations very well. Any of these different aglaonemia, also called Chinese evergreen, again, lots of different colors that they come in. This silver one is what we usually carry here, but they come in bright pinks and reds as well. It's going to handle that very well. And our 2 very favorite, very tolerant houseplants are going to be the ZZ plant and the snake plant. The ZZ plant only comes in 2 different colorations. This one is the Raven, which is considered more rare just because it is a newer cultivar that they've kind of come out with. It started showing up about 3 or 4 years ago, and they are relatively slow growing, so there's definitely a price discrepancy between the regular green and this darker one, but they grow exactly the same. They can handle very, very low light. I've seen them done in restaurants with no natural light coming in. They are extremely tolerant. And because they are so good at handling low light, they are very low water. Those 2 things usually go hand in hand. The more light a plant has, the faster it's making food for itself, the faster it's using water. So These guys, as well as the snake plants, which have pretty much same care, are going to be a once a month, if that, deep water kind of situation. When I say deep water, that means making sure that the water runs all the way through the plant, having it in a saucer or something, or taking it out to water it so that you make sure that it's fully saturated before you put it back into its space. A lot of times people will ask, well, how much do I water this when I water it? When we say give it a good water, give it a good drink every so often, it's because things really enjoy to have that full saturation and then dry out all the way before their next watering. Or in the case of lots of ferns and stuff, not dry out all the way and just, get watered again. There's not really ever going to be a perfect, give it half a cup once a week type deal. Plants are just different, lighting's different, air circulation in your house is going to be different from mine. It's just not advice we can give. But generally speaking, as long as you are able to give it a good drink and then let it dry out as much as it wants to, you'll do absolutely great with it. So again, these two are going to be our absolutely most tolerant for low light and low water, followed up by the Dracaena and the Chinese Evergreen, which are going to be not as low light, but pretty darn close and a little more water than these guys, because as you can see, their leaves are a lot thinner and they don't have as much room to store it. Going back to our medium light guys, pretty much everything on the front of the table here and this really lovely money tree I've got back here is going to be medium to bright. None of these on this table have to have bright light. I think bright light is one of those things where it's just not that common, especially since we appreciate our shade around our houses here in Texas. I know I'm not too mad that I don't have it. Electricity bill's high enough. But any of these guys can do medium light. I've picked out a variety of different textures and colors of stuff so that y'all can see. I'm just going to run through them really fast. On the edges of the table here, I've got two different types of ivy. Both of these are in the philodendron family or pothos family. This one right here is a Cebu blue. It is essentially the regular old pothos ivy, but a different color. The leaves are a little bit thinner, a little bit pointier. I absolutely love these. I think it's a really fun way to add a different color to a space than just the regular green, but they are just as easy as the old-fashioned pothos, if not easier. Personally, I've had more success with this variety in low light than I have the traditional solid green to emerald pothos. This guy over here is a philodendron Brazil. Again, a different color and texture of pothos ivy. A lot broader leaf on this, very fast grower, very easy to do. Something that we try to carry all of the time. We definitely usually have smaller containers of these, but I think right now we just have these big baskets, but very fast growing, and again, very light tolerant, so something that's easy to do. It's the philodendron Brazil, but its counterpart that's solid green, you can kind of see it has these light green stripes in the centers of the leaves on most of them. We do have a solid dark green. They're just heartleaf philodendrons. So anyway, they come in several colors, but I just really love this one with those little stripes on it. This guy right here is going to be probably the most challenging plant that I've pulled out on the table today, only because it doesn't really appreciate how hard our Fort Worth tap water is. If you have well water, if you have a filter on something, if your pipes are newer than the ones in my house and your water is not that hard, super easy. But the minerals in that water, it just doesn't love them. And sometimes you'll get extra crispiness that is so not your fault just because it's a little fussy. But this is a prayer plant, a Marantha, medium to bright light again. And what's so fun about these guys is they move a lot. You'll see them fold up and unfold based on temperature, lighting, time of day, personality of the plant. They just move a lot. So really funky. Prayer plant. And this is something that, again, comes in lots of different colors and textures, but big warning with this family is the more fantastical and interesting they look, the harder they are to do. Calathea is a very, very big family of plants, and they just get pickier from here, but beautiful, fantastic, not picky on light. Again, it's the water with the minerals thing. It's just once you get to a certain point, it becomes like a distilled water, rainwater, whole mess that a lot of us don't want to deal with. So that's a really great one. If you're into ferns, there are easier ferns than the maidenhair. The maidenhair is very challenging. It's so beautiful, but a lot of people feel like they can't do ferns because they get the Bostons or the maidenhair and it sheds everywhere and it crisps up and you feel like a failure, but it's really just that there are a lot easier ones available that you can try out. This little hurricane right here is just a twisted version of the old-fashioned bird's nest fern. We do have both available. I just thought these guys were really funky. It is going to be a more medium water than a lot of ferns are. When I say medium water, that means more like once a week instead of every day or every other day, like the maidens or some of the other ones that really don't want to dry out. This guy can dry out. And he'll let you know, he'll get a little washed out looking, a little bit of a paler green when he's really thirsty. Because of how rigid the leaves are on this, it doesn't wilt over as much as it blanches out. So there's different ways that all of these plants will express their discomfort to you, and it kind of just takes a while to see the different idiosyncrasies that they all have. But with these guys in particular, they get very washed out looking, and you'll notice something is wrong. With all plants, though, the easiest way to know that they're really thirsty is when they are very light. When you pick it up and you say, oh my gosh, that is light, it's thirsty. The water weighs a lot more than the plant does and the soil does, and that's just a super easy way to tell. This little guy is the other fern that I've pulled for y'all today. It's a rabbit's foot fern. You can see these really funky little rhizomes sticking out. These are his feet. And the leaves actually come straight off of those. So they're not roots. They're not aerial roots like the monsteras and stuff get sometimes. These are actually the base of the plant, essentially, and they spread out like this and pop their little leaves off of it. Really fun. Again, a very tolerant fern, definitely not one I would consider to be more difficult. I would say medium water again. I mean, it is a fern, so it definitely doesn't want to get super dry, but it isn't going to croak on you because you've forgotten about it. So that's nice.
Do they dry out the what are those things called again?
The rhizome? I mean, they feel dry. They have
But they, like,
hair on them.
Off at any time?
Oh no, you don't. You leave them.
You just leave them go.
Yep, you leave them, and certainly. Essentially, it would be like pruning back the plant. So if you didn't want it to get wider, absolutely fine. Isn't going to hurt it at all. That's just it trying to get bigger. So if you want to keep it smaller, you can absolutely trim those off. It doesn't have as deep of a root system. You can see there's no roots exposed on it. Even though he's quite big for this container, he doesn't need a larger container because he's very shallow, very surface level. So if you want him to be smaller, trim him up. He won't mind at all. But if you want it to continue growing and get fuller, you can put it in something that has more soil for him to rest on. That will speed up how fast he's growing. But not a necessity, just kind of, if you want to encourage more growth from him. And we'll go over pot sizes and stuff a little more. This little guy in the front is the only succulent that I have pulled for y'all today. This is a zebra aloe or Haworthia. They are one of the only succulents that is more low light tolerant. I would certainly recommend medium light. I personally do these on the east facing side of my house, and I haven't had any issues with that. They have done absolutely great in that area. But I have always heard that they can handle lower light. So if you're very into this look and you want to have that very desert cactus kind of a vibe going on in your interior, these are a fantastic one to go with. Of course, the snake plants have that really lovely look to them as well, but this is kind of just really fun because it has that really different texture that you usually can't achieve with lower light. These guys, because they are in the succulent family, store a lot of water inside of them, so even if they are dry, they're probably not ready for a water yet. You really want to wait every 2 to 3 weeks, if that, deep water kind of a deal. You'll see that he is planted in a different soil than the other guys, and you can see he has a lot more roots because he's not as shallow. but very sandy mix so that it can have more drainage. That doesn't mean watering it less when you do water, just means watering it less often, and it's just to aid in how quickly he can absorb it because he likes to stay dry for an extended time. This guy right here is a Hoya. This is the regular Hoya carnosa. They come in a variety of different textures and such, and they do flower, although it is not as common of an event to have happen. Certainly as they get bigger, it will be more frequent. Definitely medium to bright light on this one. They don't really enjoy the low light, but I pulled it because it's very easy to do. They don't need a ton of water. Weekly or every other week is more than sufficient for them. You don't necessarily have to use succulent mix with them. You can use your regular potting soil, and they're just a really fun vining plant to have around. They have a really great, just happy look to them, and I just think they're really fantastic. So if you're bored of the other ivies, the pothos, you've done them, you want something different, Hoyas are really fun if you have medium light to give them. Really interesting. And again, they do come in a lot of different textures and stuff, so you can get kind of funky with it. Lastly, I have this little rubber tree here. Definitely medium to bright light, but not nearly as picky as the other ficus. It's not a fiddle fig where it needs that south or west exposure or it'll croak on you. Lower water than a lot of people think that they are. Definitely the smaller the plant and the smaller the container, the more often you have to water it just because it will dry out faster. But with something this size inside the house, it's probably going to be every 2 weeks, deep water kind of a deal. Now again, as I was saying earlier, the brighter the light, the faster it will end up using up that water. So if you do have the exposure to give it, it will dry out faster and you'll have to water it more frequently. It's going to be something that's different for everyone and everyone's house. It has a lot to do with air circulation, so definitely just kind of having plants set up in different areas, watering them on different schedules, checking them, you'll kind of get into the rhythm of what each of them kind of want for you. Now that's a lot when you have, a dozen different plants set up around your house to figure out all their little stuff. So it's much, much easier to choose things that will have the same routine so that you don't have to go back and forth on, oh, okay, when's the last time I did this, whatnot. If you're not great at watering stuff, stick with the low water guys. Do it when you remember you've forgotten about it. They won't mind. If you tend to overwater stuff and you know that about yourself, I think definitely as a beginner, we tend to overlove our houseplants. We're just excited that they're there and they get a little waterlogged. Do some of the ferns and stuff, something that's going to appreciate that, something that's going to be able to absorb that faster so that you don't end up killing them with your love a little too fast. All right, so that's everything that I've pulled out. Oh, this money tree right here, medium light on this guy. I just thought he was gorgeous. Definitely an easy beginner type plant. The brighter the better, but not picky. I wouldn't put them in low light, but they're not going to mind some serious medium light because they have the thicker trunk on them. Not super frequent on the water, especially these really big guys. It's probably going to be every 2 to 3 weeks of real deep water, but I just thought they were lovely. We have these in all different sizes.
You can do the chevalier?
I don't think that they are actually. I think that I don't know. I think that these are the more closely related to like Pachypardiae. I'll have to look it up. I'm not sure. But we don't have any chevaliers in now, but that's another one that absolutely would be in this grouping, medium light. Okay, so let's go over some container size stuff and some soil stuff that you'll need to know for your houseplants. Generally speaking, you don't ever want to repot something into a container that's too large for it. It's a very easy way to overwater stuff, very easy way to stress stuff out. You want to stay always, always, always within 2 inches on either side. Max range for repotting. If it's really, really root bound, 2 inches on either side. If it's not super root bound, bring it down to 1. If it is something like this little rabbit's foot where you don't see the roots on the outside of it, keep it in that same size container. You can always move stuff from container to container as long as you follow those rules. Refreshing the soil, giving it a deep water, it's never going to hurt anything, but just make sure you're being mindful of the different sizes that they can come in, because it really helps to keep it from becoming stressed out. Now, when it comes to how deep the container is, that's going to depend on the plant. The fern could do like a really shallow dish because it doesn't have super deep roots, and that would be totally fine. That would allow those rhizomes to spread out more. That would be lovely. But, you wouldn't want to put it in something way deeper than it is, because it's not going to utilize that space, and that soil is going to become waterlogged. The roots aren't going to enjoy it. It's just not the thing to do with it. But when it comes to something like this money tree here, that's a lot larger, when you expand it on either side, you're going to want to give it a little more room below so that it can keep moving. It all has to do with how they like to grow naturally. Everything that's vining, everything that has a shallow root system, you can kind of cut that bottom length down and use some more shallow containers, basins and things. Everything that's more upright, that is going to have a bigger base to it, deeper roots to it, or a taproot type deal, you're going to want to account for how deep you're putting it when you're choosing your new container. Now, when it comes to potting soil, it can be as easy or as complicated as you want it to be. Generally speaking, a nice, good, regular potting soil mix. This is the Happy Frog that we carry here. It's just their regular potting soil. It does have some really gentle organic fertilizers in it. We carry our regular Mayer brand of potting soil as well. You don't have to go with the fancy organic one, but this is just some really nice stuff. It's really, it's one of those things that us plant nerds get really excited about when you open the bag and you're like, wow, this is nice soil. But, you don't have to, right? And then we do have the succulent mix as well. Anything that you want to be able to dry out faster, this is going to improve the drainage. So the Hoya, this little zebra aloe right here, even the snake plant and the ZZ plant, something that you want to be able to dry out as fast as they want to be, this just helps with that. Now, a lot of containers nowadays don't have holes in them. And that's kind of an issue because you want to be able to monitor how much water you're actually giving your plant and how much it's actually drinking. I personally go the lazy way about it. I love to set these little plastic nursery pots inside a container and pretend it's planted in there and say, hey, it's done. But if you don't love the look of that, definitely you can put a drainage layer at the bottom, pebbles, bottle caps, anything to take up that space that's going to let the water drain into it so that it is kind of a space for the water below the actual root ball and soil. But I think it's a lot easier to just set them into those containers, and that way you can take them out, water them, put them back in there, make sure it's not sitting in water, water it in its container, and then realize a couple days later that it's been sitting in water and fix it. There are still a lot of options that have holes. In that case, finding a good saucer for them makes watering day much easier. That way you don't have to pull everything out and put it in the bathtub or the kitchen sink. I don't love terracotta saucers because they do absorb moisture and they will end up leaking onto your counters. So definitely glazed, plastic, much, much easier to deal with. Definitely, if you have a whole bunch of plants and you have them in their nursery pots or things with holes and you don't have saucers, investing in some kind of a tray that you can set them all down in and let them drink up that water before you put them back, also much easier than the sink or the bathtub, but totally up to y'all. But that's kind of my tips and tricks for repotting stuff, staying within the size, making sure that you can monitor how much water is actually in there and how much it's drinking. Really, really helps with kind of the buffer of over and under watering. It's never going to be perfect, but you can keep it happy. It is much easier to overwater stuff than it is to underwater stuff. Generally speaking, you want to wait until it looks like it needs it before you give it a really thorough drink. Always give everything a really thorough drink. It's just going to be spaced out differently. So again, figuring out what kind of light you have, figuring out how often you want to water stuff, and then figuring out what groups of plants you can kind of start picking through. There's lots of different plant families, but they all fall into these same categories, and it gets a lot easier once you kind of get the basics down of, oh, okay, everything over here is a philodendron, medium to bright light, water, kind of a thing where you can start kind of figuring out what will work for you and what you can look for, because there are so many different options when it comes to all of these. You can have a really diverse collection in your home and in your space and have it all be in the same family, and no one would know unless they know about it. When it comes to fertilizing stuff, it is still important to fertilize your houseplants, even though most of them don't bloom, or if they do bloom, it's not exciting and it just kind of looks weird and you cut it off. But we've got liquid all-purpose fertilizer. This is by Good Dirt. This is some really nice stuff. We have other liquid fertilizers you can use, or water-soluble fertilizers that kind of look like, Epsom salts, but they're not, that you mix up. This is something that you add to the water that you normally water with. Not every time. For most houseplants, once a month is more than sufficient. There are, sometimes if something is still looking very washed out, you haven't fertilized in a long time, you've watered it, adding a little bit of fertilizer will kind of revitalize it. It will add that nutrients back in, and then you don't have to go through the effort of repotting the whole thing to get those minerals back in there. You can just put some on top. The other option is granule fertilizer. This is also by Fox Farms, same as this potting soil here. This is something that you do kind of seasonally, 4 to 5 months in a house plant or a container plant, dissolves over time, has instructions on the back of like how much to put per container. So if you don't want to have to worry about adding it to your water and you just want it to be slow releasing in there, this is really good stuff. We have different options on granule foods, but that's the easy way to do it. I personally like the liquid fertilizer because it's a more immediate feed and I like to feel like I've given them something. So I like to mix that up in the water just so that, after a couple of days, it's like, wow, everyone's looking so beautiful now because I did this for them, But same stuff, just different ways of applying it. Just a little fertilizer basics while we're here. We'll probably end up doing a chemical class at some point, but just, in case y'all are curious, in case you want to know, fertilizer will always have 3 numbers on it: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. The first 2 are the most important. No one has ever told me what the third one is important for, other than it's a trace mineral. So, but these first 2, nitrogen, quick growth, green growth, new growth, all the good stuff. If you're wanting something to go faster, rich green color, that's the number you're looking for. This middle number, the phosphorus, this is for blooming. So fruits, vegetables, flowers, keep it going, keep it producing. That's the number you're looking for. That's why a lot of the big bloom, grow big veggie, type stuff, it always has that big middle number on there. Houseplants don't really care. So all purpose, usually you'll see all the numbers the same, or maybe a little bit higher on the nitrogen and then the rest are the same, kind of a deal. Certainly all the fertilizer is labeled for what it's for, so you don't have to worry about it as much. You can just pick out what it says it's for. Some fertilizers will be for specific houseplants. It doesn't matter as much. Personally, I use all-purpose just because I've got a lot of different stuff and I don't want to have to worry about where's that container of, this food for this thing. A lot of the times it just has to do with that same analysis. You'll notice a lot of orchid fertilizer, African violet fertilizer, they will have the bigger middle number. They are indoor plants that bloom. It will make them bloom faster, that kind of a thing. So fertilizing is important so that you keep the minerals in that container so that they can grow healthily without you having to repot them all the time. That's kind of the deal with that. All right, and I think that's pretty much everything I had prepared. So who has questions? Yes.
You talk to your plants.
All the time. Absolutely.
Do you touch them?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a fantastic way to know if anything's wrong with them because they're supposed to feel a certain way. And you can tell when you come up to them. I mean, if this guy were super soft, he'd be thirsty and I'd be concerned about it. You know what I mean? There's nothing wrong with, also, water spots in the greenhouse here. I'm always cleaning these off. So, making sure that it feels like it's supposed to, that it looks like it's supposed to. I think that everyone learns different ways, and I'm definitely a very hands-on person, and I think that, your doctor taps your knee when you go in for your physical. So, when I'm giving my plants their physical, I'm going to shake them around and move them around and touch them and make sure everything looks right. Because sometimes, you might not see something, but you might feel it instead. Or it might look fine, and then you pick it up, and it's light, and it's soft, and, it needs water, and you didn't realize.
I have one more question.
Sure.
One guy said to water it every 2 weeks.
Oh, yeah. That thing behind you looks like an electric shears or something.
Yeah! These are fantastic. This is rickrack or zigzag cactus. Lots of different names. It is an epiphytic cactus, meaning that it is vining and grabby and attachy and all those fun things. You can see his little roots right here. He's trying to find something to grab. So cool, so neat. Bright light or full shade outside. I like to do mine outside in the summertime. But definitely if it's inside the house, the brighter the better. Definitely right in the window kind of a guy. They have a very large red flower to them, but I've yet to see one in person, so let me know if you can get it to do that. Again, middle number fertilizer, get it to bloom. Yeah, we have these ones right now, and we have the fern leaf cactus, which are just right behind it over here, which are a lot floppier. And I just love them. These have a white flower to them, same shaped flower. It's very cactusy and big. Again, let me know if you can get yours to bloom. I'm working on mine. Bright light, I have mine in a west window, but I do have big shade trees, so it's more of a medium, but he is right in the window. Or full shade outside. They love the heat. They're loving being in the greenhouse, so definitely, if you have a spot. With these guys, I mean, it's going to be like every other week. Because they're a lot thinner than most cactus, they do need more water, but it very much just depends on how quickly they dry out. Certainly if they're outside, it'll be more frequently because it's been so hot. But if you leave them exposed to the rain, the past couple weeks, they would have been totally fine. So
Is that one called rickrack as well?
this one's called fern leaf. Yep. It's either. It's, they're really fun, though. They're really neat.
I have a question. You keep saying of deep watering. Would
Yes.
you describe deep watering?
Absolutely. So there's two different ways that you can deep water. You can bottom water or you can top water. Some things prefer it one way or the other. I only bottom water my African violets because I know they'd really hate me if I didn't. But everything else I just top water. I like to have a tray set up or plug the sink or something like that. Set all my guys down in there. Water them really thoroughly on the top. And then leave them there for 15 to 20 minutes so that they can absorb as much as they want to absorb. So it's kind of a combination of bottom and top watering. Make sure that the soil's fully saturated. When you pick it up, it'll feel heavy. It's all right if it's still dripping a little and you put it back in its container. Checking later in the day or the next day to make sure that it's not drained out a bunch and sitting in water, but you want to make sure you fully saturated the soil in that container.
Would you do that could it also be done by submerging it like in a bucket?
Yeah, absolutely. You would just want to essentially wait until the bubbles stop coming up. It'll be more challenging with looser soil, especially something with a lot of perlite because that will float. But definitely is like the recommended way to do a lot of different cactus and succulents and stuff because they're planted in a rockier, heavier soil mix. It's much easier to fully submerge them and have it soak in that way as opposed to waiting for the water to get into that dense soil. So it just kind of depends.
I use it's not a thermometer, but
A moisture meter?
Yes, a moisture meter.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that helps me so much because
Yeah.
I think I've given it enough water.
Yeah.
I put that moisture meter in and it's saying...
Yeah, absolutely. Moisture meters are really handy. They are a thermometer type tool that has a gauge on the top and then a needle that comes off of it that's really thick. You're able to stick it down into the container. For example, this money tree, you can't stick your hand in there. The soil is very dense. It's got lots of roots in there. You can't tell other than by picking it up. But if he were in a big ceramic container, you wouldn't be able to tell anyways because that's heavy. So having a moisture meter to be able to probe deep into the soil, into the root ball, to tell you whether or not it's received enough water is super, super handy. We definitely use them around here if we're kind of questioning whether or not something needs it, but we don't want to leave it without water, Much, much easier for stuff in the home that is in large containers or that's hard to reach. Definitely a useful tool.
Okay, my other question is, I have a cat at home that
Mhm.
an indoor cat.
Yeah.
Absolutely wants to test every plant that I have.
Yeah.
Ate a ponytail palm
Yeah.
totally to the soil. The whole thing didn't die.
That's good.
The
Yeah, the cat of the palm.
the plant was gone. He ate it all. But he does like to. Is there any of the ones that you put up here that you know is definitely going to make an animal sick?
I hate to say whether or not something is for sure going to make them sick. I will say there is a master list on the SPCA website.
Oh.
Very, very in-depth. It's got all the indoor stuff. It's got some stuff in the garden. There's a cat section. There's a dog section. Again, most of these are going to be tropical plants, so none of them are good for them to eat. But at the same time, most things, even if they're on that list of not safe, they would have to eat a lot of it to start feeling sick. But my general rule of thumb is if it's a plant that has like a thicker sap to it, these rubber trees, obviously in the name, this is where we get rubber from. These are huge in the tropics. I mean, they are like bigger than our oak trees kind of trees. So they're full of latex. That will make you very sick. And you can tell when you break something off of it, white sap starts to come out. That's definitely going to be one of those. We do try to, the list from the SPCA is very long, so definitely we usually direct people to the list to check things out, but certainly there are some plants that come with the warning of this is not, super safe for, animals type deal. This guy, there's some other ones that I didn't end up pulling that, again, have different types of saps and stuff that would be harmful to them. But generally speaking, I think the Hoyas are good. Almost all the ivies are on the safe list. I'm pretty sure the ZZ plant is, but again, something to double check. I think a lot of the ferns are, but it just kind of depends, how much they consume. Sure. Yes.
So this is ZZ plant has
Mhm.
small. You said to keep it in the size container.
Yeah.
And so you want it to get big. So I just let it kind of outgrow that container.
Yeah.
Something.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you have to be really patient with it. The ZZ plants have very, very bulbous roots on them. Let me grab a smaller one so I can kind of show y'all because it's really interesting. They are kind of one of those things that if you let it outgrow its container too much, it's a pain to repot, and if you leave it in this little plastic guy here, it might end up being easier actually because you might have to just cut it off. They have incredibly, incredibly bulbous roots on them. See, he's kind of stuck in there. You can sort of see how thick these are, but they also have these spheres of root in there, like these really big, they almost look like bulbs kind of a thing, and that's just part of their root structure. So definitely you want to let them get as tight as possible till there's, almost all roots in there. But, if it's already planted in a ceramic container, it'll be very challenging to get it out. So it's kind of at your own discretion. Again, moving up an inch on either side is not really ever going to be an issue as long as there are visible roots on the outside of the root ball when you take the plant out of its current container, but definitely wouldn't move up 2 inches at a time. It's going to be kind of a slow fertilizing it, moving it up a size, fertilizing it, kind of grind. They're not very fast growing plants, but they are very tolerant. So
You say 1 to 2 inches. But you would say 6
on either side. Yeah.
But stick with the 1 inch. That way that's not too much.
Yeah, I would, just because they like to be so tight in their container. That way you just don't risk it, kind of a thing. But, if you just back off on the watering, more than your current schedule is, you could definitely do the 2 inches on either side. You would just have to be mindful of the fact that that soil is going to hold more water than it currently is, kind of a deal. So it would just be kind of backing up again on it to kind of spare you having to repot it as often. You could definitely make those jumps, but just be mindful of it.
My other question was on ferns.
Mm.
I recently bought some here, and then I went on vacation. They
Yeah.
are crispy.
Yeah.
Will they come back? Or they
Depends on the fern. A lot of the time they will.
Oh, really?
Ooh.
There's some green, but some of it is definitely like silver, which is pretty.
Yeah. The silver's dead, but if it has some green left on it, a lot of the times the ferns actually will come back from that root ball. Trim the silver off. Anytime you get yellow leaves, brown leaves, crispy leaves, they don't look good, cut them off. The plant thinks it's still alive and it's trying to put nutrients and energy into it, and it's not coming back. It's not going to turn back to green. Trim it off. Don't be scared of it. Just pull, even with the eyelash ferns, they're very kind of just spiky little ferns. They like to stay very moist. So definitely as they dry out, they blanch out. Again, what I was talking about with this guy. So that's why it's looking silver now. Those leaves are dead at this point. Trim them off, pull them off, kind of a thing. Whatever green that's left, leave that there so it can photosynthesize, but it should come back. Even the maidenhair ferns, you can have it completely crisp up, chop it to the ground, kind of a deal. Make sure it's moist, make sure it's in that medium to bright light, and it will come back. Just takes a while. Yes?
If you have a snake plant, like I can't see that one right there.
Yeah. It's just a weird color.
I have one like the one back behind your right leg.
Yeah.
It has damage on it.
Mm-hmm.
It was given to me when the other people were filling it. Should I
Gotcha.
cut the damaged ones off? You know, like at the very tip of it.
Yeah.
Damage. Should I cut it off at the root, that one, or cut it off at the top and let it get a
Yeah.
edge to it?
Generally speaking, I think it does look a lot nicer if you cut it off at the base. The way that the snake plants produce their leaves, they are each individual leaves that are coming up. So it won't regrow the edge of it. So in the long term, it will look better, I think, to cut it off at the bottom so that it can put out an entirely new leaf instead of just having that crisp end. Because if you do cut it, it will recallus and crisp.
Is that a medium light?
Medium to low light. They're incredibly tolerant. And again, with that comes the lower water requirements. So definitely one of our more easy ones. The thing to worry about with snake plants, I feel like, is certainly overwatering, and overwatering that leads to some kind of a bacterial infection on the leaves. If you've ever had a snake plant or a cactus or something and it turns mushy on the edges, you get spots of mushiness. That's actually a bacterial infection that they are prone to, comes from overwatering, but it's one of those things where it's not really your fault that it's happening. It's just that they're prone to it and was exposed to it, There's not really anything you can do about it except let it dry out very thoroughly. If it gets one of those spots, cut the whole leaf off, wipe down the plant with just a little bit of isopropyl alcohol. Should be totally fine from that point on, but let it dry out really thoroughly. That's kind of the main thing that you run into with those.
And my other question was, do you ever grow in pitcher plants?
Yeah, absolutely. They're hard.
One mother, as a joke, we send each other like the hardest plants to keep alive.
I got you.
So it's our game.
Yeah.
But when it came to me, it had one pitcher.
Mm-hmm.
So as soon as I could get some distilled water, I watered it.
Yeah.
One pitcher, but it wasn't soon enough, counting it having been shipped.
Yeah.
So how would you water it if there are no pitchers? Because it was dead. So
Yeah. Usually I like to do pitcher plants in sphagnum moss. It probably already came potted in that. That is going to be that really spongy, brown colored, raisin smelling moss.
Like a baseball pitcher?
Pitcher like the carnivorous plant, Nepenthes. It's a hold on, I'll pull up a picture. Like a okay. Pitcher plant. There's lots of different types of them. Some of them are just the upright pitcher.
We had it at school.
Oh my.
Yeah, they eat bugs with those pitchers. The bugs fall in, kind of a deal.
Are they an outside plant?
You can do them in the shade in the summertime, but they're not cold hardy because they are from the tropics. But definitely deep watering that sphagnum moss ball that it's in is going to be really essential. They do like to stay moist. They are a bog swamp kind of a plant. We actually have a state park in Houston that has some upright pitchers in it that you can go see, which is really, really cool. They're not native to there, but they're gorgeous and they're there now. When it does regrow its pitchers, just be sure, like you said, distilled water, very essential with carnivorous plants. That's why they're difficult, is they cannot handle any minerals. It's beyond just being fussy and getting a little crisp. It will kill them. Because they've evolved to eat instead of absorb, they just can't handle it. It just fries them. So distilled water, sphagnum moss, humidity will help. When it does regrow the pitchers, flushing those out with the distilled water will help, but the actual watering is still going to be on the root ball. That is how it will absorb it. The filling of the pitchers just kind of helps it process whatever it gets, and you can actually put granule fertilizer like this or Osmocote or something in the pitchers like every 3 months. You just drop some in the pitchers kind of a thing, and that will actually feed them the same way the bugs do, because that's how they absorb their nutrients, not the root ball.
So what I'm doing now is just watering the root,
Mm-hmm.
watering the ball,
Yep.
cutting off any damages that I
Yep.
see.
Yeah, you can also put like a container or plastic bag over the top.
Oh, okay. So
That'll help.
I have it sitting
Yeah.
on a plastic thing with pebbles.
Yeah.
Out, and then the distilled water in the bottom to keep it humid. I didn't even
Nice. Yeah, that'll just be another layer of it. Yep.
handle liquid fertilizer.
No liquid fertilizer. Yeah. Just in the pitchers themselves, you can put granule fertilizer sometimes, but no fertilizer on the root ball because that'll burn it. Yep.
Well, that would be a hard.
Yeah, they're challenging. They're not as challenging as like the Venus flytraps are typically, but definitely the carnivorous plants are more of a kind of oddity, like yeah. They're more for fun. Yeah.
Great.
Thank you. Were there any other questions or anything?
So I
Yep.
bought the silver dragon and
Yeah.
black velvet I was talking to you about the other day.
Yeah.
So would you suggest leaving them in their plastic containers and just putting them in a
Yeah, definitely. Alocasias,
I know you said
I think I have one behind me. So this one's an Alocasia Tiny Dancer. They're super neat. I'm not gonna lie, these guys make me a little nervous just because they're very particular, but gorgeous plants, very, very closely related to the elephant ears that we do outside around here. Those are coleocacias, these are alocasias. So they come from a bulb, they come from a corm. So they do not have a deep root system. This guy down at the bottom, you can see he's grown quite a few, but this is pretty much all they'll get. It's not going to be much bigger than that because most of their nutrients are packed into that little corm in the center. So you don't really have to put them in bigger containers. It's more so maintaining the humidity, making sure they dry out, but get a good drink, usually weekly. That's kind of the big thing with them. Humidity prevents pest damage. Pests don't love to be humid. Plants do love to be humid. My house is not humid at all. So, it's just kind of one of those things. A lot of people go the extra step and, have little humidifiers set up. They've become a lot cheaper nowadays. You can get them at Aldi and stuff for $10 and just kind of set them up places. Not a necessity, but when you get into the pickier stuff, it does really help maintain them. Even though they absorb the water through their root ball, the leaves do appreciate it, and again, it prevents pest damage. A lot of times, things like the English ivy inside the home, the alocasias, sometimes the prayer plants are going to be more prone to spider mites and pests like that. They hate the humidity, and again, all of those types of plants would prefer to be humid. But it's one of those things where if you have a plant that they like to be on, they're going to find a way to get to it. There's lots of different things you can do to treat and prevent for it, but the easiest way to do it is to pick out plants they don't want to be on. So, it just kind of depends.
instead of having like a humidifier, just like spritz them.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. You can get a little mister. You can, just go ham and just walk around and spritz them. I love to do that. I think it's so much fun. And again, we tend to overlove our houseplants because it's exciting to have them inside. So that is a great way to kind of love on them without over loving them. Everything can get a little spritz. Just kind of making sure that you're not also spraying your walls or pouring water on your receiver for your TV like I did the other day. Just, be kind of mindful about it, but definitely everything would love that. It's not ever going to be a necessity unless it's like a maiden hair fern that wants to be, creekside and hill country and doesn't want to be in your house. So, sure. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. This is all purpose. It's got a higher nitrogen than the other two numbers in there. So new growth, green growth kind of a deal. But this is some really good stuff. This is something that you can use on absolutely anything. Anything labeled all purpose, going to be fine for it. If the benefit of getting something labeled for vegetables is that the middle number instead of the first number will be higher. The middle number is for blooming, therefore producing vegetables and fruit. The first number is going to be for, think like leaves and the vine itself. So the benefit of getting something labeled for veggies would be that it would make it flower and produce faster, but it's not going to hurt it. I mean, it's still going to help. It's just not what it's made for as much. But all purpose, you can use it on your trees and your shrubs and everything, and it won't matter. Much easier to do granule outside, I think, just because, mixing this up, you probably need like a 5-gallon bucket to, get it all mixed up and put it throughout your yard type deal. But it just kind of depends.
The granule, should you mix it into the soil or leave it on the top?
It doesn't really matter because it will be dissolving as the water hits it. You can leave it on that top layer there. Now, if you only bottom watered your plants, you would want to mix it in really well so that it is getting contact with that water earlier on. But I like to leave it on the top layer so that I don't ever run the risk of it burning any of the root ball. Even though it's a slow release, you don't really want it to be touching the roots, as it will, kind of dissolve a little faster and you could end up with some burning. Any kind of damage that happens to the root ball or the leaves or things like that is going to open the door for pests and infections and things. So I like to leave it on top, but the exception would be if you bottom water, mix it throughout, but try to keep it on the edges as opposed to in that root ball.
Oh, thank you.
Sure. Anything else?
Great job.
I think we're done, everybody. All right, well, let me know if there's anything that catches your